Again, we do appreciate your presence this morning. We're thankful for you, thankful for your cooperation. As we discuss on a regular basis, the wearing of masks and the social distancing is getting over the limit. And yet, it is something that we're trying to do to try to protect ourselves and protect others. And you folks have been very cooperative and very patient, and we appreciate that very much. This morning we want to talk about home and money, the importance of money management. You know, as we look at finances and as we look at material things, it's interesting to notice that it is through material things that God has chosen to bless His people. He blesses us every day with the things that we need to survive. He gives us opportunities to work and to earn. He blesses us so that we might be able to conduct our lives and be able to hopefully live lives in accordance to His divine will. Because of the way that God created things and the way that God has set things in order, money or finances is a part of life. It is here to stay. And we must learn in one way or the other as to how we are to conduct ourselves. Money is something that can be very hazardous to our health, physically as well as spiritually. It is somewhat like a drug. We can abuse it, and it can destroy our lives. On the other hand, drugs, if used properly, can help us to sustain life and live a better life. Money or finances is like a mirror. We look into that mirror to see who and what we are. As someone has correctly said, even if you've never met a person, you don't know anything about them, you can look at their checkbook, or you can look at their finance statements, and know their priorities, know where they spend their money, what's most important, and what really is important to them. And learn a great deal about them, maybe a whole lot more than you could even in meeting them or talking to them and having many discussions. So where we spend our money, how we spend our money, says a lot about our faith, whether or not we truly put our trust and our confidence in God. When we look at the Scriptures, money is talked about, or the economic issues are talked about more than many other subjects. Out of some 38 parables that you read in the Bible, some 16 of them deal with economic issues. Someone has said that there are some 2,000 passages in the Bible that deal with economic issues. And when we come to the New Testament, in the Gospels, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, 1 out of every 10 verses has something to do with finances or money. The point being, money was important to Jesus. And He discussed it because money really matters. The problem is that with many of us, no, it matters too much. Jesus never condemns making money. But the Apostle Paul in 1 Timothy 6 and verse 10 does talk about the danger of the love of money. Not money itself, but the love of it is the root of all kinds of evil. And thus we have these warnings throughout the Scriptures. All of us likely have received a package at one time or the other, or at least we've seen one. And stamped on the outside of that package in bold letters is "handled with care." Well, I suggest to you that we get packages from God every day. He blesses us with strength. He blesses us with ability. He blesses us with money. He blesses us with relationships. And there is a sense in which, as we read the Scriptures, all of those are stamped, handled with care. All of these things are blessings that come to us that allow us to truly enjoy life and live, hopefully, happy and well-adjusted lives. And yet there is that constant danger of what finances can do to us. Again, it's a little bit like fire. If it's handled properly, it's a wonderful thing. It's something that is essential to us. But if it gets out of control, it can completely destroy us in so many ways. There's an interesting thing about money. It is silent until you spend it, and then it talks. It says something about what matters. It says what is important to us. It says something about our priorities. It says something about truly who and what we are. So a faith indicator has much to do with our pocketbooks and how we spend our money. And again, because of the numerous passages that deal with it, it is something that we need to recognize very carefully. You see, it can be a difference between heaven and hell. In Matthew chapter 25, beginning in verse 14, Jesus relates the parable of the talents. It is related. And it's one of those judgment parables. And you remember you have the 5-talent man and the 2 and the 1. And the talents were a denomination of money, thought by many to be somewhere around equivalent of $1,000 and likely in silver. So it's a significant amount. We often think of that parable more in reference to the talents that we have rather than a denomination of money. But it is interesting when you look at what the master said to the 5-talent and the 2-talent man who used that money wisely. He said, now enter into the joy of the Lord. You drop on down a few verses and you find the 1-talent man who buried that money and did not use it properly. He was to be cast into outer darkness where there was weeping and gnashing of teeth. So the seriousness of my pocketbook is seen in the fact that it can affect where I will spend eternity. Whether you and I will go to heaven or hell or not. Our first point that I want us to make is to understand and at least remind us that everything belongs to God. Everything belongs ultimately to God. Because we are legal owners of so many things, I think that's difficult for us to appreciate or at least keep in the foremost parts of our thoughts and our minds. We have titles to our cars. We have a deed to our house. We have receipts to show that we paid for all of those things that are in our houses, that we have paid for the clothing that we have on this morning. And because of that, sometimes it is difficult for us to remember that everything belongs to God. You know, ultimately God is the owner of everything. We are simply under Him. He's the landlord. We are the tenants. We possess, we occupy, we manage it, but we don't own anything. God made everything. Now He puts us in charge. We are the managers and we are responsible for His gifts. Just as the 3 stewards were responsible for the talents that they were given in Matthew chapter 25. Under God, we live or enjoy a perfect economic equality. We all, every one of us, own exactly the very same amount. Zero. Nothing. Zilch. You and I don't own anything. Everything is simply on loan. Right down to the clothes on our backs. We have been blessed with God with the opportunity and the ability to work and to make that gain. But the truth of the matter is, all of us are charity cases. And I think that we don't like to think about it in that light. Especially as we maybe look at others around us that are able to work but refuse to work. Those that are not willing or for one reason or the other don't provide for themselves, depend upon others. And we have a tendency to put ourselves here and put those folks there. But you know, the truth of the matter is, all of us are charity cases. There was some junk mail, what I call junk mail, that came in, and at the top it had the caption, "2 self-made millionaires." And I suspect the point of the paper was to suggest that you and I can be millionaires if we follow this process. But is anybody a self-made millionaire? Not really. These two individuals evidently were blessed with opportunities and situations, and likely because of their work and their efforts and their planning and the wisdom, they have been blessed by God to make $1 million. But they definitely are not self-made. I think another thing that is a challenge to us is that many of us may have come up the hard way, especially those of us that are older. And I know in talking to some of you over the years that you grew up in that time where you maybe had 2 sets of clothing. You had your work clothes, your play clothes, you had your school clothes, and maybe if you were in the upper group, you had some church clothes too. And struggle in the things that you had to eat. I've got a picture of my grandfather and my dad when Dad was about 8 years old. And they're in front of the house where they live, and it's got rocks underneath, and there's a board falling off the side. It wasn't a fit doghouse by our standards today, but that's where they lived at that time. So many of us, we can relate to that. You younger folks maybe don't relate to that as well. But also, this group I'm talking to, we also grew up in a time when jobs became more numerous in the 50s and 60s, and we were able to move up and make more money, and we became successful. And then the danger that came was that we began to think that we did it. That we, because of our ability and because of our wisdom and because of our work ethic, we have accumulated, pretending as if we did it all by ourselves. And that simply isn't true. Deuteronomy chapter 8, beginning of verse 17 particularly, Moses is addressing the children of Israel and coming to the promised land. And one of the dangers that had been preached to them on a number of occasions was the danger of them coming into the promised land, a land flowing with milk and honey. And they would dwell in houses that they had not built. And they would reap crops that they had not planted. And there was a danger that they would begin to look around and say, hey, look what we have done. The truth of the matter was, God had blessed them, and God had given them these things. Deuteronomy 8 and verse 17, he says, then you will say in your heart, my power and the might of my hand have gained this wealth. But then in verse 18 he says, for it is He, talking about God, who gives you power to get wealth. Moses wanted the people to understand that the danger of wealth, the danger of success, the danger of the accumulation of things, and them moving to the point and forgetting that God had brought them out of Egyptian slavery, that God had helped them to win the battles and to drive the idolatrous people from the land. That danger is alive and well today, especially in America, where we have been blessed to have jobs and opportunities and to make and to do, and to maybe begin to forget the blessings of God to each of us. We must acknowledge God and God's ownership. In Psalm 8 and verse 6, the psalmist said, "You have made him to have dominion over all the works of your hands," talking about God and what he has done for man. "You have put all things under his feet." The psalmist acknowledged and recognized that everything that we've done, everything that we've accomplished, everything that we have were things that God built and created and made available to us. Our attitude is essential in reference to finances, in reference to money. In Deuteronomy chapter 5 and verse 32, Moses said to the people, "Be careful to do what the Lord your God has commanded you. Don't turn neither to the right hand or to the left." He was emphasizing the importance of them listening to God and having a godly, biblical attitude in reference to all of their lives. And this morning, as we think about this idea, particularly in reference to finances, our second point this morning has to do with budget. You know, budgeting is something that we all do to one degree or the other. Some of us much more detailed than others, most likely. I suspect that probably most of us do not have a written budget. It's more something that we keep in our head. But I want to suggest to you this morning that we need to look carefully at how and where we're spending our money. You remember under the old law, the law of Moses, and even before that, folks were giving a tenth or a tithe. How did they know that they were giving a tenth or a tithe? The only way that could be done was for them to have a record. Whether it was of the crop, or it was the sheep, or the goats, or the cattle, or the camels, or whatever it may have been, if they were a merchant in town and actually received gold or silver, whatever the exchange was. There had to be a way of them calculating and understanding exactly what they were giving and what they were keeping. Budgeting is something that's presented in the Scriptures. One example is Proverbs 27 and verse 23, where the writer says, "Be diligent to know the state of your flocks and to attend to your herds." It was a statement that dealt with something that those folks could definitely understand. That their finances, their wealth, their economic value, in many cases, had to do with animals. It had to do with their flocks. It had to do with their herds. I think that we could apply that to ourselves this morning by saying that we need to give attention to our clothing budget, to our housing budget. We need to give attention to our food budget, to understand and recognize. You see, within the family, budgeting is a good way of a husband and wife communicating properly. You probably are aware that one of the major reasons for divorce is money. And as a rule, it's simply because of a lack of communication and a lack of proper budgeting. money being spent where it should not be spent, money being wasted, or the piling up of bills, and rather the paying of those bills, money being used on other things that the family wants. So even within our marriages, to properly look at what we have and what God has blessed us with, financial peace and relief from worry of paying our bills on time can be solved as a rule with proper budgeting. I'm convinced, this is my opinion for the morning, I'm convinced that we all need a written budget so that we can actually know. Studies show that when it comes to giving, and we'll look at that, Lord willing, in our follow-up lesson tonight. But studies show that the average Christian gives no more than 4%. 4%. In churches of Christ, I think it's a little bit higher than that, maybe 4.8. But it's not close to the Old Testament principle of 10%. We don't live under the old law. We are not commanded to tithe. But it is definitely a standard that can help us to understand. And I suspect, and I would be interested in hearing from you, that many of us do not know what percentage we're giving. Do you? Do you know what percentage that you are giving on a weekly basis? The only way that we could know that is to have a budget. To look at what we are bringing in, whether it's your paycheck or it's your Social Security check and whatever else, investments, and then look at that. There's a temptation for us to take $20 or $40 or $100, and that seems like a good contribution, and we put that in, but we don't really have a clue sometimes as to whether or not we really are being generous. You see, the budget must start with priorities. It starts with what's most important, and then we work our way down. And again, the only way for us to know whether we're putting more into the contribution plate than we're paying for dog and cat food. Whether we're putting more into the contribution plate than we're spending to go out to a restaurant 2 or 3 times a week. Whether or not we're spending more on cold drinks and potato chips over a period of time. The only way for us to know that is for us to have a record. The seriousness of it comes back, does it not, to passages like Matthew chapter 25. Enter now into the joy of thy Lord, or being cast out into outer darkness. The difference was the use of the blessings that the Lord and Master had given to these 3 servants. God has blessed us. Our eternal destiny depends upon us being good stewards of those things that we have. In James chapter 4, beginning in verse 13, we find the picture painted of an individual that says, today or tomorrow we'll go into a city and we'll spend a year there and we'll buy and sell and make gain. And then he goes on to say, but what is your life? It's even a vapor that appears for a little time and then it vanishes away. What you need to do is say, if the Lord wills. The problem is not buying and spending and making gain. The problem is leaving God out. The problem is not recognizing God in our lives. We must recognize God in every aspect of our lives. And as we are addressing this morning, especially in reference to our finances, I hope that we, if we're not already doing this, that we're challenged this morning to look carefully at where our money is going and whether or not the work of the Lord is a priority. Whether or not we truly are giving and even sacrificing for the cause of God, or whether or not we have just sort of floated along and we don't really know. We really don't know how well we're doing because we've never really taken the time to look at it and to check up on ourselves. From a spiritual standpoint, as this definitely would be a part of it, Paul says that we are to look at ourselves. We are to evaluate ourselves to see whether or not we truly are in the faith. When we become a part of the faith in that sense, by repentance and baptism and confession, and we remain a faithful part of the faith, by such things as giving, by such things as forgiving, by such things as compassion for others and telling others about Jesus. This morning, I hope that each of us will look into our hearts and that we will look and see whether or not our priorities really are what they ought to be. One of the ways that we can do that is to look at the financial aspect of it. If we need to change our lives, let's do that today, whether it requires getting down on our knees at home and private and talking to God and resolving to do better, or maybe you need to make a public statement. Those of you that are listening in this morning, if we can assist you in any way, we'll be honored to try to do that, to let us know. Those of us that are here this morning, let's look at our lives, let's look at our hearts, and let's make sure that truly God is a priority. Let's be standing as we sing.
When we walk with the Lord in the light of His word, what a glory He sheds on our way. While we do His good will, He abides with us still, and with all who will trust and obey. Trust and obey, for there's no other way to be happy in Jesus but to trust and obey.
As we are all joined together here, either in person in the building or through the phone line, we're going to take this time to serve the Lord's Supper. Everyone has their individual package and offers on this for you. Let's go to God in prayer. Lord, we thank you for this day you've given us. We thank you for all the many ways that you have blessed our lives. We would ask that as we take this bread which represents the body of your Son, just help each and every person here to do so in a safe manner, according to your will. In your Son's name we pray. So God, again, in a like manner, Heavenly Father, as we take this cup which represents the fruit of the tree, this cup which is the fruit of the vine, which represents the blood of your Son spilled out on the cross for our sins. We just ask you once again that all here would partake of it in a manner pleasing to you. Just help us to remember what it represents and the price that was paid for our forgiveness. In your Son's name we pray. Separate and apart from the Lord's Supper, this time we're going to have a prayer at the altar. This is something we normally do because not done so much after first taking the collection in the front. So, I'm not sure. Lord, we thank you for all the many ways that you have blessed our lives. Thank you for all the blessings you give us, the monetary blessings, the blessings of family, of this church family, just all the many ways, most of which we probably don't even notice. We would ask that as we all give back to you, that you would just help us to give in a pleasing manner with cheerful hearts. Help us to give not only monetarily, but to give of our time, our talents. Just help us to give back in any way that we can. Just ask that you would give all those here today who are in charge of the money to decide how it is used, help it to be used in a manner to best spread your word. Help us all as good students to always prioritize you.
So we stand for a closing prayer. Let be the time that finds our hearts in Christian love, the fellowship of kindred minds is like to that of love.
So bow again. Lord in heaven, we thank you for this day. Thank you for the service that we just had. Thank you, Father, for all that you do for us. All the things that you've given us. And especially, Father, we thank you for your Son. Who came to this earth to die for us, so we might have a hope in our life. Now, Father, as we are dismissed from this place, and we end this service, Father, we ask that you remind us daily our duty to you. And we ask that you guide us as we go through our daily lives each week, through our lives to come. Father, we ask that you guide us in such a way that we remember that all the things that we do are in accordance, should be in accordance with your will. And ask that you guide us, keep us in line.